You ready? Okay. We'll get started with council meeting follow-up. Mr. City Manager.
Mr. Mayor, members of the council, good evening. I don't really have anything to follow up on other than what you see with regard to the items on the agenda tonight.
Okay. Anybody else? All right. We'll move on to mayoral election process. Mr. City Manager.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Believe it or not, we're at that time of the year where we need to make decisions about next year's leadership officers, if you will. The mayor and vice mayor are who we're talking about. Typically what happens is council gives a provisional sort of thumbs up as to who not only is nominated, but who would be the successful nominee. And then in the formal meeting in January, that is ratified or made official by a formal vote on the floor. Our city clerk has been doing a lot of work in terms of getting the process ready for you to participate in. And so if I could defer to her for some detail, I'd appreciate it.
Okay.
Your Honor, members of council, as city manager mentioned, we're about to start the process. So typically what we do is we hand out our little nomination forms, and then you can all take them, you can hand them back to me, or you can bring them by the office, send them in, however you choose. And then we'll get that on a ballot, and then the next work session, you'll actually cast your ballots, and then the city attorney and I will go back and count them, and then we announce it. Then the very first meeting of the year in January is when you'll actually vote and, as he said, ratify it. So at this time, I'm here to hand out the forms and answer any questions you may have.
Anybody have any questions?
We got 3, you don't get one. We need some down this way.
Oh, yeah, we need a couple more.
You can fill them out now, or you can do it later and turn them into Mrs. Tremmel.
Thank you.
Thank you. Kyle, did you have any questions as far as they're doing the election for leadership for next year?
Okay.
Okay. All right, we'll move on to phase 3 of Graves implementation, employee compensation. Mr. City Manager.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. As you just mentioned, we are moving into the final phase of the Graves study implementation. This is the part where the bulk of compensation and so forth is dealt with in the final phase of this process. Chances are we would have certainly had this discussion a year ago, if you will, but as you recall, the interruption that was provided to us and everybody else in the world that came at the hands of COVID and the pandemic did delay the implementation of this phase of the program. As you all are aware, however, we have gone through the first 2 phases, and like I said, this is probably the more weighty portion of the implementation given its implication with regard to raises and compensation in general. You probably are aware, and we're going to go ahead and pull up the charts while we're waiting here. While I offer some introductory comments. That Graves accomplished 2 things primarily. Number 1 is it incorporated market data with regard to the majority of our positions in the organization, as well as incorporated the decision-making process to where council considers this on an annual basis with respect to budgetary conditions and parameters and so on. And so those are 2 primary motivations, if you will, behind the Graves implementation, or at least the results, that is. And without a doubt, we hope to keep moving with respect to putting this in place and getting folks on track with regard to their respective wage ranges. One of the other things, though, that we hope to accomplish in this phase of the implementation is dealing with compression issues, certainly as it relates to bringing employees into a new wage range and so on. We also have to be aware of the distance between those wages and the respective supervisors' wages in terms of that relationship. You will see here in just a few minutes that the standard that we're trying to attempt to capture with regard to the costs that you'll see associated with compression is that of about 85 to 90%, which means we want to try to keep our subordinates, beneath supervisors' wages to some 85 or 90%, 10 to 15% margin there. And you'll see that price, as it were. What I'd like to do is go over the revenue side of this discussion here, and then lead into the expense portion of this discussion. Many of you are familiar with the chart that we have at your positions that discusses, how we're doing on an actual basis. Looks like this. We have them around the organization, and certainly in the council meeting room, you see one of these charts as well. That gives you a feel for how we have performed so far in the fiscal year 22. Green bars are good, pink bars are not so good, because that basically means that revenue in the sales tax category have come beneath budget. In this particular circumstance, we also can see how this looks compared to our 3-year market average, if you will, over the last number of years. So when you compare the seasonality to the last 3 years, that's what you have in terms of the red line, and the blue line in this chart is what we're looking at from an actual standpoint. So being above the lines, of course, is good, and that's why you see that green designation being beneath budget tells us that we didn't quite make the grade from a sales tax revenue perspective. Looking at the chart that you see here, we try to incorporate that analysis into a 1/12 analysis as well. So if we were to assume a flat line approach to looking at a threshold for the budget, then you would want to pay attention to that green line there. That green line shows you basically on a 1/12 perspective how actuals compare to where we should be, or where we think we should be, or where the budget at least anticipates. And again, we're looking at sales tax because sales tax is our breadbasket, if you will, for the general fund. The unfortunate thing about sales taxes is that it's fairly volatile, hard to predict, and therefore warrants a lot of discussion, particularly when it comes time to talk about compensation, because we almost live and die by how well our sales taxes do in the general fund in particular. So you've got a couple forces in motion in this chart. You've got, again, your green line, your 1/12 sort of analysis. You've got your 3-year average that tells us how we're doing on a seasonal basis. And then when you look at the actuals, you can see how we're faring. Those numbers that you see there, particularly behind the vertical line, are the actual checks that have been submitted to the city from the state. If we shift our focus back to the spreadsheet, sort of the left-hand side of the chart here, we are looking at kind of an analysis that gives you a feel for how our revenues can react over time. And we've broken it out in 2 major categories here. On the right-hand side of that spreadsheet, you've got your straight line approach, your 1/12 approach. that suggests a $280,000 surplus right now. If you look at our seasonal analysis, however, it suggests that we're a little underwater, not by much, but certainly to some degree. That piece in the yellow is the variable that you can sort of manipulate, if you will, to determine what your financial future is going to look like to consider in this question. For example, if we were to put 3.5 in that yellow box there as a growth factor, you can see what that does to our revenue. It would suggest that by the end of the fiscal year, if we maintain a fairly consistent 3.5% growth rate over the next fiscal year, you can see at the very bottom that that's going to put us in a surplus position of just over $600,000. Okay? If you look at it at a seasonal basis, that number looks a little different. And you know, from my perspective, I can't quite tell what that number is because it's kind of small, but it's not as aggressive a number there. Are you going to increase that? Is that what you're doing?
Do that.
Okay, thank you. This is obviously a dynamic worksheet so that we can look at variables. You can gauge your tolerance with regard to predictions and projections. And then you can see the differences with respect to what happens. Now, one thing I would have you keep in mind, if you'll recall from our budget discussions back in May or whatever, we actually built into our revenue projections, i.e. our budget projection here on this chart, a 5% growth factor over the previous year. And there was a lot of discussion as to whether or not that was appropriate or whether it should be more, whether it should be less, and so on. But we stuck with a 5% growth factor over last year in terms of this revenue category in the general fund. So you have to kind of keep that in mind because basically, depending on what you put in that yellow box as your, you know, factor that you want to build into your projections, keep in mind that we're also talking about that 5% as well. So the reality is, if you're comfortable with a 3.5%, you're really talking about being comfortable with an 8.5% growth factor throughout the rest of the year over what it was that we earned in actual receipts last year. Okay? Right now, if we were to earn not another dollar in the general fund over the next year, that growth factor would be at what?
It's at 0.
It would be right at a...
0. Then nothing else would be added in.
Okay. All right. But again, if we put in 2%, for example, if we think we're going to grow on a consistent basis throughout the rest of the fiscal year at 2%, that gives you a feel for what you know, margins you might be looking at by the end of the year, both on a seasonal basis as well as a 1/12 basis. Okay? So you can get a little bit of a range with respect to what you might have to work with. Okay? So that's how this chart works. That's how these graphs kind of play together from a revenue projection standpoint. We're going to be turning back to this throughout our conversation, I'm sure. But let's see how this spreads across our expenses. And so with that, we're going to switch to our next chart. Again, our expense chart. And yeah, that is small. We're going to blow that up a little. You can see those bar charts on the right-hand side. Those bar charts, that gray bar and that, you know, salmon sort of colored bar, responds to what you did on the revenue side of this discussion. So any of those variables you adjusted on the revenue side, you're going to see reflected in those bars there, which also tie into the bottom line numbers. In fact, that one big black number there, the 260, they all kind of coordinate together, okay? So right now, with respect to the growth that we've seen so far, particularly on a 1/12 basis, $260,000 is your sort of your threshold, your demarcation, the dollars that you have to work with in terms of some of these decisions you may want to make tonight, which does reflect on the gray bar side of your chart. So anything that exceeds that gray bar, you're going to see some alerting information that says, you know, we're moving into dollars that we have to get from somewhere else. And of course, you can decide where that comes from too, if in fact we want to move in that direction. Focusing on the left-hand side of your chart here, the sort of the spreadsheet portion of this information, you've got a number of things to consider, cost factors that you can talk about this evening that hopefully will lead to a decision that you want to make tonight, okay? The ones in blue are the categories of costs that you will want to seriously consider if in fact you want to unfreeze wages, okay? Those three things need to be dealt with in order to unfreeze wages, all right? Which seems to be sort of the primary objective leading to this discussion tonight, unfreezing wages. And you can see in the yellow, those are also variable options for you to consider. And as you mess with each one of those variables, you know, manipulate them and change them and adjust them and so on, it will impact directly that bold number on the bottom of the column there, that 260, and it'll also demonstrate to you where you're at in relation to the dollars that you have available from the revenue side of this discussion. Okay? As you consider your cost alternatives tonight, I want you to remember something really important about your employees, okay? And you can see here that we have it broken out basically in two major categories, and that would be your sworn staff and your non-sworn staff in the organization, all right? And that is captured in the light blue police step increase and the Graves adjustment salary, Graves adjustment salary adjustments category, okay? So that basically breaks out your two major categories of employees, sworn and non-sworn, for those that are on and still within their wage range, okay? Those are your folks who have been frozen over the last year or so, whatever that time frame has been. Those two blue entries are those that we believe have been frozen, have not been getting raises in a consistent step fashion. And so when you adjust those numbers, you'll see what it takes, what the costs are to unfreeze your folks. Right now, we're suggesting, as you can see in the yellow box there, a 5% increase for both categories of those employees, those folks that have been frozen. And you can see on the far right what that means in terms of the respective costs. As it relates to police sworn employees who have been frozen, that cost is roughly $119,435 to give them what traditionally has been considered a step, a 5% increase basically. If you were to apply that same logic, if you will, to non-sworn employees, non-officer employees, and put in a 5% there, you can see what that associated cost would be. And it looks like, from my perspective, that's just about $55,000 to get folks unfrozen who are not police officers. All right? So that gives you two broad categories of what's going on. We wanted to identify the general fund particularly, but those aren't the only funds that are going to incur costs. The general fund is not the only fund. You've also got your water fund. You've also got your sewer fund. You've got other funds within the general fund that are going to incur costs. We're trying to summarize as much as possible so that you can see, at least from your most vulnerable fund, what's going on. So for the general fund alone, you're looking at $260,000 to deal with unfreezing wages and to deal with compression, which we would recommend doing if that is your motivation. If your motivation is to unfreeze wages, your cost is going to be that $260,000 to the general fund alone. Now, if you wanted to do other things, like for example, another category of employees that we have that is represented for the police department on line 36, it's entitled Police Step Increase Previously at Maximum Pay Step. That means that for those kinds of employees who've been previously maxed out, not redlined, but maxed out in their current wage range or in their previous wage range, I should say, by moving to the Graves plan, they now have room to grow from a wage standpoint. That doesn't necessarily mean that they were frozen though. And so that distinction is important to understand, because if indeed you incorporate a 5% for those employees, particularly in the police department, of which there are 16 who have been maxed out, capped in the previous pay plan, but now have some growth in their wage range. And if you were to put in a 5% there, which is a typical step, you're going to add $29,000, almost $30,000 to that cost category of employees. Now, if you do the same thing for employees that are not police, not sworn employees, then you're going to want to add a 5% in the box that Jill has enumerated. And that'll bring another $108,000 worth of costs, which, as you can see on the bottom line there, that jumps to $428,000, which means you have, I'm looking at that smaller number in red down below, you have that, thank you, Jill, another $147,000 to find in order to make up that difference. Okay, that can be from reserves, it can be from some of your undesignated cash balances. But in order to make that happen, at the levels that you see in the yellow box, that's the number that you've got to come up with. Now, moving over to the revenue page, again, if we could, you would also have to, if you want it to come from the general fund, for example, to make up that $147,000, you're going to want to play with your yellow box here to see if in fact you can feel comfortable about a growth factor that would suck up that excess funding. Okay, and I'm just using this as an example. Obviously, there's a lot of ways you can go in your consideration this evening. If we, for example, put in that 2% that we were talking about earlier, that's going to change your revenue projection. Let's switch back to see how that impacts. You can see that that basically sucks up all of that extra money that you didn't have originally, and you could afford all of those variables in that yellow box all of a sudden. But you have to be comfortable that you're going to get a 2% growth factor through the rest of the fiscal year. And I don't know if that's going to be the case or not, but that's something that you can talk about and debate and determine whether or not you're comfortable with that type of a projection, if you will. And in fact, as you can see on the bottom of that chart too, you also have, if that growth factor comes to pass, another $77,000 to the good, if that growth factor should hold throughout the rest of the fiscal year. Okay? So that's how your expense chart works. And remember, you've basically got 3 categories of employees that you need to consider at this junction. However, I would tell you also that I would like to come back to you in May to consider a compensation question again, okay? That would probably be over and above what we decide tonight. So in other words, in preparation for the new budget, I would hope that I could bring you some numbers that would suggest an additional step, if you will, or additional increases to consider for employees starting July 1. And that, of course, would be the new budget, fiscal year 23. Okay? Mr. Mayor, any questions that your team might have?
Councilman Nell.
More of a comment, I suppose, but I think, we've been very open and honest about wanting to give these raises to our policemen, and I think now's the time to do it. The projections are there. I don't particularly like playing with projection numbers, because if you don't meet them, you got to go digging, and it's never a fun place. My opinion is line 33 and 36, those are the ones that we revisit in May. Those employees are already maxed out. They're making the top wage, and I'm not slighting them by saying, well, we don't get it, we haven't had a raise. You're already making the maximum pay. And our police department is the highest paid in the entire state of Wyoming, all law enforcement included. So our maxed out guys that are maxed is something I'd like to visit in May. We would be safe, according to your projections and the numbers, giving those raises to the other individuals at this time. Do you not agree with that?
Mr. Mayor, Councilman Nell, I'm going to translate a little bit what I think you're proposing, if you will. For those in blue, and I mean blue as in, the options that you have on your chart there, both 34 and 37, those lines, 34 and 37, those are folks that have been frozen and have ostensibly missed raises in the past because of the freezing activity. And so you're proposing sticking strictly to an unfreezing program.
Correct.
And waiting for, like, the new fiscal year or whatever to deal with those who now have room in their wages, their wage ranges, but haven't necessarily been frozen.
Correct. And whether we put a 2% or a 3% increase in there, it's going to make it look wonderful on paper. But if we don't hit those, we're in trouble. But come May, we'll know what that exact number was. And at that time, just like we did with the unfreezing, when we told them we'd come back and revisit that in November, I think we come back and revisit in May, line 36 and 33 and 36, which would be the ones that are already being paid at the maximum. Am I making sense? Okay.
Councilmember Pollock.
Thank you. My question is more just to make sure I'm understanding where we're at in Graves' implementation. In the memo, so this is phase 3, correct? And so in the memo, it's suggesting that phase 3 would be, we would be evaluating pay increases for positions in areas of compression or a pay increase may be warranted due to the job market. And so it was my understanding that when we did that study, it was relatively a deep dive into specific positions and departments and that sort of thing. And this seems to be relatively broad in terms of it. If I'm understanding correctly, we would be applying this step. Well, let's maybe take the police out of it because that's being treated differently here. But the other two, sort of across the board, aside from folks that are already maxed out. Is that correct?
Mr. Mayor, council member, you're bringing up some good points. And in fact, if I could use that as an opportunity to discuss some of these complexities a little more, I'd certainly appreciate it, because you're right. What we're suggesting here, at least as an initial proposal, is that sworn staff and non-sworn staff be treated essentially the same in terms of unfreezing those who have been frozen. But the reality is, the Graves study suggests that for council, every year, you really have two questions that you're asking yourself when it comes to compensation. And that question is whether or not sworn staff should get a step, which typically means 5%, and whether or not non-sworn staff or general government employees, however you want to phrase it, should get a raise. And that doesn't necessarily mean that market would suggest a full step is necessarily appropriate. So in other words, market does suggest that sworn police officers be considered on a step basis and that non-sworn people in the organization be considered on a percentage basis. And so there is a distinction. And what we're proposing is that they both be essentially treated the same, particularly from an unfreezing standpoint. Now, with regard to the previous phases that have been already implemented, the employees are now on a new wage range. And for a lot of employees, in fact, most employees, that means that their earnability in the organization has increased. And so where previously their range looked like this, their range now looks like this. And so more steps are in play, and those who have been capped previously now have opportunities to earn more, whereas previously they were stopped. You also have redlined employees in the organization, even still. And those are people who've been earning so far above their wage range that they aren't caught up, basically, to what they're making. The wage ranges don't catch up to what they're currently making. And they will not necessarily receive anything here in what we're proposing, but that's a very small minority, maybe 20 or so employees that we're talking about throughout the entire organization. Did I get your answer?
Yeah, yes, I have a follow-up based on that description. So it sounds to me like this action that's on the screen right now doesn't fully address the objective of phase 3 then. Like this is, we could do this and it wouldn't necessarily mean that we've addressed additional areas of compression or areas where particular positions may be out of sort of market competitiveness, right? So is that correct? I mean, this seems almost like we need to get people unfrozen and then next another phase to deal with some of what's listed in phase 3. Is that right? Or am I missing something about what's going to happen here that will deal with compression or increases that might be warranted due to the market?
Mr. Mayor, council member, I think if, I'm not sure that I can totally follow your question, and so I'm confessing a little inability to follow. But what I would say is that, without a doubt, there are a number of employees that would not see progress, if you will, if you only dealt with those who have been frozen at this juncture, okay? And so certainly, while there has been room made at the end of most every employee's wage range, this proposal that you see on the screen does not allow certain segments of employees, a number of employees, to enjoy that progression yet. And so I think I hear what you're saying, but that's my first crack at it.
Yeah, I think so. I'm just thinking if everybody gets the same wage increase, then we haven't changed compression. We've just
Oh, I see.
the whole thing,
Okay.
right? So to me, the Graves bit was a little bit more nuanced. Some people might go up by more, some people might less, to where we've felt like we've addressed jobs more specifically, positions more specifically than a blanket 5% increase. I guess that's what I'm trying to understand is it seems to me that in order to address compression, we would need some sort of variable adjustments to different positions in order to get uncompressed.
Mr. Mayor, council member, I think particularly if you did not take on the cost of that almost 21,000 in the general fund to adjust for compression that we currently are experiencing, I would probably agree. And so if you were to make that zero, then we would probably still be in almost an upside down situation in many positions. But we are suggesting that by adjusting this at least, you're going to have a pretty decent margin. That's not to say that we can't or we shouldn't come back and talk to you again sometime about compression, but for now, I think we'd be in a pretty good spot. Hi.
Hi. I was just going to add just a little clarification. We did do that. We did analyze for compression. And so those numbers are included. In particular, the supervisors, there is that ratio. And that's where we found the most significant compression issues are included in that. So I just wanted to clarify that was addressed.
Vice Mayor Pacheco.
Thank you. So Carter, This wouldn't, however we move forward with this grades adjustment, with salary adjustments, compression, et cetera, those that are impacted by the pay freeze, this would not include a COLA at all.
Mr. Mayor, Mr. Vice Mayor, you are correct. This does not consider a COLA. A COLA is a completely different approach, one that we are not proposing at this point in time. But were you to do that, that would be a cost plus proposal.
So it would be in addition to that as well.
Right.
Would a COLA be something that the organization, and maybe we could look at down the road if we do institute these raises to say, because I know inflation is hitting everybody. I know we're looking at all these things and just wondering how we could factor in COLAs. Because I don't even know the last time we've done a COLA here, but that might be something we might have to have a conversation about as well. And I know that adds more strain on the budget, but that's just something that is also, I know I hear quite a bit, not only in this organization, people maybe, but also at the college and school districts and stuff like that, so.
Mr. Mayor, Councilman, Vice Mayor, I would say that that a COLA conversation would be appropriate to take on in May. And I'm not saying it's inappropriate to talk about it now either. I'm just saying that from a financial planning standpoint, doing it during the budget year is certainly much more helpful. But without a doubt, you're definitely casting a broader net in terms of employees that would be aided by
that COLA.
A COLA, that's right.
Okay,
Yeah,
thank you.
absolutely.
Right. I didn't want to go too far out.
No.
There,
That's a great question.
Okay, thank you.
Councilman Cathy.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. If I understood right, basically in all of these numbers, there is already a 5% growth rate figured into these numbers. If we go to the sales tax projection sheet and leave that at 0, is that correct? Yes.
Mr. Mayor, Councilman, that would assume that we do not have a growth rate that we're building into your revenue projections. That's right. So if you look at that the way it is right now, and you're comparing it against that, that's right. We are basically using the dollars that you've already accrued to fund raises.
Well, that's what I was asking about, is that basically where we stand right now, we can fund these with a 0% projection increase over this sheet. And the reason I'm asking that is, as of right now, we're $75,000 under our projections for year to date. And so I guess I hate to see a continued increase over where we are right now for the next 6 months. We're already behind. So I don't know how we can actually, in all honesty, say that we're going to have a 2% growth from this point forward.
And Mr. Mayor, if I may point out, Councilman Cathy, to your point, if you look at the bottom of the chart here, the bottom line basically, 260 is what's needed to fund the blue shaded costs, and then you still have that 20,920 to work with, so to speak. It's left over. That's right.
Okay. And that's if we have no additional projections, which that'll increase exponentially, and then in May, we'll be in a great spot to talk about this again.
Hopefully, yep.
Right. Yep. Sorry.
Councilwoman Ingebrigtsen.
You're fine.
Just a quick clarification. So if we just went ahead with everybody in the blue right now, then in May, we can then look at a COLA kind of across the board. Is that what we're talking about?
Mr. Mayor, Councilwoman, we could look at a COLA. We could look at lines 33 and 36 and give those folks progress through their new wage ranges. There's a number of things that we could look at in May, but COLA certainly would be one of them.
Just as a follow-up, so is it a possibility, since we've got the 20,000, just saying, since if we gave everybody in the blue, say maybe instead of 5%, maybe 4%, and then possibly give the other two categories like a flat bonus, say like $1,000 or something like that, would that be a possibility to till May until we dealt with everything by then?
Or let's say, for example, I mean, that's certainly an option, and we can play around with that kind of a variable too. We have that ready to roll. If you wanted to put in a small percentage on 33 and 36, and you put maybe like a 1 or 2 or something there. Yeah, you can see what that'll do to the dollars you have to work with. There you go. Yeah. You still have $33,000 to work with if you gave everybody something.
Right.
You know, and this is just an example of what you're suggesting. That way everybody gets something, even though those that have been frozen aren't getting a full step in this example.
Right.
Okay.
Councilwoman Quest.
Okay, I think you may have answered this, but I'm sorry if I'm repeating a question. So the lines 33 and 36 that are not blue shaded,
Right.
has that maximum pay limitation had the effect of freezing a lot of those salaries leading up to this point? I understand that the blue, that those were frozen.
Right.
So that's a problem we're trying to solve. But has that maximum pay step had the effect of limiting raises for how long? And I guess the reason I'm asking that is just, I'm thinking about what you suggested, Lisa, that maybe there's a way to meet this in the middle somehow.
Mr. Mayor, Councilwoman, thank you for the question. I would say for those on the, that were maxed out on the previous scale, they were not frozen. They were just maxed out. They'd come to the top of their wage band and had earned all the money that was available, if you will, in that wage band. So for them, I'd say no. Now, they're moving onto this new chart, right? Their earnability has increased. And so, but that has been obviously a recent implementation. That earnability has not been available for long. And so, one could argue what that really means in terms of a decision to not progress them now. Now, I would certainly say that in July, when we're having this in May, when we're having this conversation for July, if we didn't do anything for those folks, then I would think it's a pretty reasonable argument to make that they've been frozen at their current spot on the wage range because they have more room to grow, whereas previously they did not.
Councilman now.
Thank you. I'm just going to be blunt. They're already making the maximum pay and have been for quite a while our other people have been frozen with no raises and they've missed several steps along the way. I am absolutely not comfortable cutting their 5% down to 4%. Not at all. We can revisit in May those folks that are already making the maximum pay in the market. They're maxed out for a reason. They're making damn good wage for what they do based on the market. Now in May, if the anticipated revenue continues to climb like we hope it does, we'll have the money to be able to do that for them. But I'm more concerned about taking care of those people who haven't had a raise in forever and are on a much lower pay scale. So I like what you had originally, and I like the idea of coming back in May and visiting on 33 and 36. I'm just not comfortable cutting that 5% for those guys. They've waited how long for a raise now? And unfortunately, those are the people, that 5%, they're the ones that are out on the street. They're the ones mixing it up every single day and have gone without a pay raise while those other folks on those other lines are maxed out. So, I mean, I'm as far as I'm concerned, they can wait till May and we give the full 5% to our deserved people who haven't had a raise in quite a while. That's just my opinion, so.
Carter, if I could just clarify though, the line 34, that is not sworn officers on the street, correct? That is salary officers.
No, 37 is.
Yeah.
Mr. Mayor, 37 is the capture of those who've been frozen that are sworn. That blue space on 37, those dollars are representative of those who've been frozen and are sworn.
Correct, and then 34 are non-sworn officers at 5%.
That would be non-sworn employees, which would include dispatchers, which would include parks folks and water folks and so on. 34 is meant to capture everybody who is not sworn and has been frozen.
Okay. So I asked that question because of the fact that talking about the sworn officers being the one to get the 5%, there's actually 5% going to non-sworn other employees within the organization. And then I guess a follow-up question to that is the police department themselves are on a different pay scale within Graves. They're on a step pay. All other employees are on a percentage. So in each step that they take, it's 5% step for law enforcement?
Mr. Mayor, until they get to the very tail end of their new wage range, it does start to taper, so it doesn't necessarily mean 5%. For those employees, however, that we are proposing have been maxed out, and if you were to put a 5%, that would generally capture a full step for all those employees that have been maxed out.
Okay. All right. Councilmember Pollack.
I'm going to throw another question/option on the table. I agree that I think we need to take the full 5%, but I'm wondering if there's been any consideration given to, now, thank you for, I see the compression line as its own thing there, so thank you for, I mean, I've been staring at it, but I didn't comprehend it, so thank you for that. I'm wondering about, has there been any consideration to doing that incrementally, say, half now, half in May, or something like that to free up additional funds? Because my thinking is that folks who are, whose wage is going to be addressed in the compression line are also included in line 34, where they'll be getting the 5% increase. It's not one or the other, right? We're 5% plus a compression factor.
Mr. Mayor, council member, that is correct, but the problem is if you deal only with that portion of the cost scenario, in part, you run the risk of some supervisors making less than those that they supervise.
If we don't
Because our
take it all the way to fix compression first.
Right, because some of our supervisors are that close to their employees that any adjustment that is not made on their behalf could potentially mean that you all of a sudden have employees making more than their supervisors.
Okay.
Yeah, and we wouldn't recommend that.
Yeah. Okay. Also, follow up, so there was some head shaking that also isn't right. So I just want to make sure I understand it correctly. So can you explain?
So the compression issue is separate as on that line. And so we would suggest that happen. Otherwise, as Carter explained, it's just going to go on top of each other or make that compression even worse. So that's what we're trying to alleviate is by spreading that out a little bit with everything that we've proposed tonight.
So would some folks then get a compression adjustment and the 5% salary adjustment, or?
It's possible, right? It's totally separate. Okay.
So it's one or, you're getting one or the other?
We've gone through a lot of different scenarios.
Yeah, sure.
That's why I try to keep them all straight. So in this proposal, they are separate. Each of those lines are separate.
Okay, so essentially, line 34 represents all of the people who are not getting their salaries adjusted for compression.
Yes.
And line 35 is specifically that set of employee that are getting their salaries adjusted for compression. Thank you.
Yes.
Anybody else have any questions? Councilman Nell.
Just one comment. I'm sorry. I appreciate the work you guys put into this. This has been long overdue. Carter, I think we can all agree on that. And this takes a lot of brain racking and a lot of work. And I appreciate the fact that you guys did this and took the time to get it done because our employees are going to be far better for it. And so is our city because we're only as good as our people and we've got some damn good people. So it's just time to start compensating them. So thanks for the hard work. Very much appreciated.
Councilman Cathy.
All I was going to say is at this point, and maybe I'm stealing your thunder, but I would go ahead and propose to go with the 5, the 100 and the 5 to where we're at the 260 on this spreadsheet, and on the, basically stick with the 260 on that one with a 0% there and see where we come out come May when it's time for budget.
Is everybody all right with that, or?
And do remember, we did give a bonus to all employees in July, I believe, right? So it's not like everybody's been left out. Everybody got a little something. And, you know, as the sales tax projections continue to go, we can continue to support our folks. So we just have to do it a step at a time.
Okay, do you need anything else on this then?
Mr. Mayor, it sounds like then if we could switch back to the other chart here, council is proposing that lines 34, 35, and 37 be activated with regard to unfreezing positions and getting that earnability underway. The only thing that I would suggest you should be aware of is, based on that line 27, the variable you also have to choose from allows you to determine how many months this should be in play. So with 6 being your entry there under column E, line 27, that would suggest a January implementation. If we were to put it up to, say, 7 months, you can see what that does to your dollar figures, meaning starting in December 1, whatever, you know. And, or conversely, if you were to put it, you know, further out into the new year, say, then of course you save some money. We are recommending at least January. It's up to you to determine whether or not you want to do that sooner or whatever.
Carter, we're revisiting this in May just because of budget time and.
Right.
Okay.
Right. Can you put it back to 6?
Councilman now.
Thank you. I'm glad you showed that, because I was going to ask, with the holidays coming, why we couldn't do that now. And so that makes perfect sense. But I don't, even though the numbers look better in February, I think this should be implemented at the first of the year, just like you've got it projected. It seems fiscally that's the best way to do it. Wouldn't you agree with that?
Mr. Mayor, Councilman, yeah, certainly I do. And without a doubt, you know, looking at December is kind of the earliest time frame, if you will. That does put us a little bit upside down, but it's not necessarily the most horrible of options either. You know, can you put it to 7? And then you can see what that looks like. That does put us a little over, you know, 22.4 over.
Well, in my opinion, to be fiscally responsible, I say we stay with January 1, and then the numbers line up, and we're not operating in the red, which is something I don't think we should be doing. So I like I guess I'm moving to stick with the original proposal for January 1.
January 1 then? Everybody good with that?
And again, thank you guys. That's a lot of hard work, so.
Thank you.
But our employees will be better for it, so.
Thank you for your patience with it all.
For your patience.
Right.
All that just to say yes, I really like your idea.
Right. Yeah, there's lots of questions to learn.
Thank you.
Okay, we'll move on to parks watering data. Mr. City Manager.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Members of the council, you have a lot of information pertaining to a requested topic regarding parks watering. You have seen in your memo a lot of numbers. You've also seen some options. And to remind you, the main question that you asked for us to look into was, what room would we have with respect to what we spend on irrigation of city facilities, typically parks and special areas? Could we look at, from a cost savings perspective, particularly in the general fund, so that we can lower our operational costs overall and hopefully save some money for other priorities that you have, not the least of which would, potentially be employees. and compensation. You probably noted in your memo that for fiscal year '22, we actually entered an irrigation cost figure of $365,000. We believe we're going to come way short of that, probably by a third, mostly because of the ferric issues that we had from a water production standpoint right in the middle of the summer. And I'm sure you remember that difficulty that we ran into in terms of getting chemical into our water treatment process. So I wouldn't suggest that 260 is your figure that you're going to work with changes that you would make. It's probably more along the lines of $400,000 in terms of that grand total figure that you should consider as a target for reduction. And the reason I say that is because not only do you have parks and special areas, but you also have the turf outside of City Hall. You also have turf outside of fire stations and so on that also contribute to your overall cost of irrigation alone. I would also remind you, however, the figures that we did not put together for your memo and for your consideration. Turf is a maintenance-intensive asset for our facilities. Not only do you have irrigation, you also have the cost of fertilizer. You also have the cost of mowing, and we try to do that, a lot in your park areas as well as outside of City Hall. You have, herbicide applications, and all of that, of course, is equipment and manpower time as well. You do not have those figures in your memo tonight. All you have is irrigation as sort of a target culprit, if you will, for costs to deal with turf. Okay? The other thing I want to bring your attention to, and I really appreciate Zalima and her team with regard to the thought that they gave to this, there are other things to look at besides just reducing your amount of turf space. And I'll leave that for Zalima to go through with you. So you have a number of things to consider, not all of which, however, they will require some capital investment if you want to look at other options as well. But nonetheless, we've tried to give you a pretty comprehensive view of things you could consider and costs you could target, not the least of which is your irrigation, which we think would be closer to $400,000. And so with that, Mr. Mayor, I'd be pleased to turn the time over to Zalima to walk us through some of this.
Mayor, Council. So I think Carter set the table quite nicely with regard to what we're looking at annual expenditures, certainly with regard to our parks areas, our special areas. And just for clarification, special areas are non-park areas that are irrigated and maintained by our Parks Department. So those are all the planters along 2nd Street that are not adopted by other agencies. Those are the CY islands that are maintained by our Parks Department. We have 81 of those areas throughout the entire city that require a lot of irrigation and maintenance. And then, of course, our parks. So I also wanted to point out we have not in this memo considered the golf course or our cemetery or our athletic fields. Okay, so this is strictly parks and special areas. However, in terms of what we propose as possible cost reductions, those could span system-wide any irrigation area. So the first of the items that we would like to propose for your consideration, and what we're asking for is some direction on what items you would like us to explore further, get some good costs estimated for you, talk about other impacts that may happen with regard to these ideas. So the first one is to install a new broad spectrum radio control system citywide. So right now we have 145 separate irrigation systems for our parks, for our facilities that have irrigation. Several parks may have multiple controllers because of the size. So 145 across the entire city system. 45 are currently on a Motorola system, which is remote, which allows us to control those systems from the service center. Additionally, 11 are on cellular systems that can be controlled from anywhere. So of course, the benefit to having these remote controlled systems is that you can shut off irrigation if we have significant rain. You can shut off irrigation if we're entering into water restrictions, and it doesn't take a person going out to the exact location to shut those off. So unfortunately, though, that's only about 55, and we have 145 systems system-wide. So we have to actually go touch irrigation systems in order to implement things like water restrictions or rain delays, and oftentimes the expense of having people, labor, to go out and touch those systems for a day doesn't necessarily make it worthwhile to shut the water off. Hence calls about irrigating parks after it's rained for a day, right? So implementing a system-wide broad spectrum irrigation controller system would save in irrigation costs certainly, and it would save in labor costs as well. The added value to this system is that it includes moisture control sensors that would be installed system-wide, and so where you have rain events that provide adequate moisture, those systems would automatically shut off, they would not irrigate. Additionally, if there were acute abnormalities within the system, so we're putting out way more water than we should be, it would identify that, shut it off, alert our staff, and we could go out and fix what's probably a broken head or a leak, okay? So that's the first suggested alternative that we can explore further if you're interested in that. The second one would be to convert additional irrigation systems throughout the city to raw well water. So currently we do use raw water irrigation for several of our facilities. Several of our athletic fields, the municipal golf course, Fort Casper grounds, Paradise Valley and Wells Park are all currently on well water, which of course saves us in paying the regional water system for irrigation for those areas. There are opportunities, we believe at this time, and this is something that we would certainly have to research further, there are opportunities for us to connect some existing irrigation systems, such as at the service center, which is very close to the soccer complex, such as the water distribution garage, which is very close to the Fort Casper Museum area. We would be able to connect those irrigation systems to the existing raw water well systems and take them off of potable water that we're charged for. In addition, there may be an opportunity to find other parks that could go on raw water irrigation. The challenge there is that we would have to do some assessments in those parks. We would have experts come out and take some measurements, advise us whether or not they believe that that's a viable option at that location, and then we go through the expense of drilling the well and hope that there's enough water there to serve our irrigation needs. Okay, so that is option number 2 that we could explore further for you. Option number 3 is to eliminate or reduce the water rate for irrigating public parks. The idea here is that right now we pay the regional water system the same rate that anybody else pays for water consumption. And so if we wanted to essentially pass some of the expense for watering our public parks onto ratepayers, we could do that. The region could give us discounts at parks or free water to water just the parks, public spaces, and then they could adjust their own rate models to account for the loss that they would see coming from city funds. And then the last option for you to consider is that we just reduce irrigated parkland in our special areas altogether. And that doesn't necessarily mean we're proposing to sell off parks. There's lots of different ways that we could reduce the area, including just turning some turf area into natural space that requires a lot less irrigation, or zero-scaped sort of areas that could, save us in irrigation costs down the road. Certainly, I would suggest that there are some opportunities to look at land that could be reduced, but of course that would take further evaluation and some citizen engagement to determine if that's viable or not too. So those are the 4 ideas that we had to propose to you. Certainly, we would offer any feedback you have about those particular ideas or any other suggestions that you might have. We're happy to explore for you as well.
Councilman Cassie.
appreciate the information that you put together. That was very good. And I guess, feel that we need to kind of use a combination of all of those. We ought to probably first look at the places that we could either zero-scape or go back to the other type of grass, things like that, more of a native approach. I would be very interested. Regional water is not going to give us free water. So I think there, but by the same token, we take regional water's charge and mark it up, and I'm assuming that's kind of what we're paying ourselves, is that rate that everybody else pays. Now, I would be very interested if we only charged ourselves, basically paid for the water we use in parks and the dollars you're talking about here, if we only paid ourselves our wholesale rate, and then how much of a rate increase we would have to pass on to customers to cover that loss in revenue. Because in essence, we're borrowing from Peter to pay Paul in that instance. We're taking out of the general fund to turn around and put it in the water fund. So I would be very interested in what that interplay is. I would also be very interested to see how much you think going to the remote operated with the rain monitors, or moisture monitors, how much you think that would save in total gallons used. Because as we all know, we've seen where you may get a toad strangler over at Mike Cedar and Susie Murray Park doesn't get a drop. So I think we could see some savings there and potentially use those savings to turn around and then offset the drilling of new wells in strategic locations.
Councilman Neal.
Thanks. Well, as with any topic that seems to come before this council, especially when we're talking about parks and green grass, it's going to be a hot button issue. It's just the way it is. Now, we subsidize our constituents in Casper with their water. The city does. They don't pay what other cities pay to get water. So we're very good about doing that. But to me, this is almost one of those damned if you do, damned if you don't. So, you know, you have the Kyles of the world who say, let it burn, you know, and I mean, no, I'm being honest. I mean, that was one of your big key points was, let's just stop water and let's save the money on the water. And, you know, and then you have other people who want that lush green grass. So, and it's a huge draw to our community. The amount of parks we have per capita here it's unseen. I wasn't busting on you. I was just using an example, but parks are a huge draw for our city because we have so many of them and the grass is green and it's lush. And I know when we stopped watering, the Ferric helped us be able to curtail the amount of water we did, but I know we lost some plants and some shrubs and people were up in arms. I would love to see our press who comes to our meetings put a survey out there to the public and say, okay, what's more important to you, a cheaper water bill or green grass in the parks? You know what I mean? Because then that would help give us some guidance as to where we want to go. And I'd also, like Councilman Cathy said, I'd want to know the cost differential and how many years it would take to pay back in order to put a monitoring system like that in. So say, you know, it's going to stop it from watering on a rainy day. Well, how many rainy days do we really have here? And how many years is it going to take to pay back to put those monitors in? So, you know, I'd want to see all that broken down before we decided to spend that kind of money also. But if I can implore our press to get an incognito, you know what I'm looking for? Survey, thank you. A survey out there to our people. Do you want green grass in all the parks? Are you okay with us eliminating a lot of the grassy areas? You know, are you okay paying a little more on your water bill in order to, you know, to keep our parks green? I think this is going to be a huge hot button issue for the public, and I think we need to reach out to them and find out where they want to be, because I'm sure we all see it differently.
Councilman Gamrow.
Here he comes, baby.
Thank you, Mayor. I'm going to try not to rant on this one because I feel that's where my mind's going. I would concur with Councilman Cathy and Councilman Nell in regards to wanting to see some sort of analysis regarding if we were to put our entire irrigation system onto a remote controller, what those potential cost savings would be. Because that was really my whole point of bringing this up was I wanted to know if there was some upfront capital costs that we could potentially incur to save much more money over the long term. And so that remote system, especially it sounds like, so if I heard you correctly, we have 145 separate systems, 40, 50 of which were on the Motorola, 11 of which were on cellular. So does that mean we have like 80 or 90 systems that require hands-on touching? I know the labor wasn't a part of this, but I can only imagine what that costs to have 80, 90 of those systems touched by city staff when they need to be tampered with. So I'd be very interested to see what the cost of one of those systems are and what any projected reductions in water usage and labor costs. If we could realize cost savings after just several years, that's something that would very much interest me. I'd also be curious if a system like that, I know the Wyoming Department of Energy and potentially the EPA, they offer grants for energy reduction and stuff, so I wonder if we've explored that. I know I worked at a community mental health center here, and they had grants to do a variety of things, change lighting, to turn systems into gray water systems so that you're recycling like shower water for toilet use and stuff like that. And so I wonder, this sounds like something that would be in line with some of the grants that I've looked at in the past, and so I wonder if there's funding out there that would help us convert that system. And so yeah, going back to my original point, the reason I brought this up was just to see what, if we could realize long-term cost savings converting some of this. You've identified there are irrigated parkland and special areas that offer little to no value to citizens in their community due to size, seclusion, close proximity to other parks. And so those are obviously the low-hanging fruit. CY is the good, I've brought it up. CY is a great example, in my opinion, of an area that is not used for public. I drive that road every single day, and I've never seen anybody eating lunch in that special area. And so, to me, it just seems not appropriate to be having city staff go over there, maintain it, having water to water the grass and stuff. I would much prefer to see that zero-scape to make it look nice, but have city staff only have to touch it, once in the spring, they mulch it and whatever, and it's set up on a drip system, and, we don't have to mess with it much of the year. If anyone else has anything else to say, I'll gather my thoughts and maybe I'll come back for round two.
I'll just segue on the end of that, though, with what Kyle was saying about CY, because that is a good example of an area that nobody goes to. It doesn't. I mean, it's a nice area, and to say, hey, take the grass out of there and put something else up there, I'm sure there's a lot of people who'd be upset with that. So I guess my question is, has there been any thought in those areas of type of landscaping that can be done to where you may be taking grass out, but you're replacing it with something that is very low maintenance and is attractive than as opposed to a bunch of gravel or rocks out there that the zero-scape would bring us?
Mayor, council, so admittedly, we have not developed, hard plans for what we would do in those areas. We wanted to see what council came back with as far as direction went. But certainly, we have had internal discussions about what options we would have to make sure that it's still a beautified, attractive area, but reduce the maintenance and irrigation expense for sure.
And then just to follow up to that, do you have an idea of how many special areas there are like that maybe fit what CY is? It's a park area in the middle of two very busy lanes of traffic that nobody wants to play Frogger to get across to the middle of. Are there several of those within the city that we'd be able to do something else with to, maybe start there and reduce, some of this money by, replacing it with something that still is attractive but takes virtually no maintenance?
Mayor, right off the top of my head, I can think of 3 other areas that fall right into that same category. Just very underutilized, you know, we're not adding much value to our citizenry having those areas turfed. And so certainly, I think, you know, I'd hate to give you an actual estimate, but I would say close to a dozen.
Okay. Councilmember Pollock.
Thank you. I'd just like to add that I think doing this sort of analysis is very appropriate. Like, we have these assets, we're spending money on them. I think it's appropriate to ask, how are they benefiting citizens? Like, is it truly making their lives better? Are people visiting Casper because of the Citywide Parkway? Are they staying in Casper because of the Citywide Parkway? Or are there ways that we could reinvest that money in assets that people care about more and that they get more benefit from? So I think it's a really appropriate question to ask. I think these options are, I think, you know, kind of trying to get creative and have some strategy behind this makes a lot of sense to me. So I think, you know, maybe elements of many of these, as Councilman Cathy said, would make sense. I mean, I hate to give direction back to you, like, please explore all 4 of these, but maybe that is the direction, because I do think it might be a hybrid model that's most strategic for us. And so I guess that would be my, you know, based on this information, hard to give too much hard direction, because it's, you know, if it comes back that it's going to be $20 million to upgrade our irrigation, it'll be a non-starter, but not that it will, but, you know, I think there's an interesting opportunity to be strategic, to, even if we start to do this little by little and just, you know, convert one every now and then. In 10 years, maybe we'll have a set of assets that we feel really good about, that we can demonstrate are providing value to our community, and we'll have, you know, made different arrangements for some of these other places.
Councilman Gamros.
No, not necessarily. But yeah, I mean, I would concur with Councilwoman Pollock. I would hate to give you a guidance to, you know, go for all 4 of them. I was the one that originally brought this up, so I appreciate the work you've done thus far. But yeah, I think those are 4 good options, and I guess I'm personally interested in getting a little bit more refined, you know, what is the cost of, so looks like we have 120 acres of park and special area, and you know, if we're spending annually $260,000 a year, that comes out to something like $2,100 an acre per year to water, not, you know, aside from the cost of labor for mowing the grass and having people on site to finagle with watering systems and stuff like that. And so I would be curious to know what a cost, you know, per acre of transforming land from turf to xeriscaping, if that's, you know, $15,000 to convert that land. Well, you know, if we consider $2,000 in watering plus a couple thousand in maintenance, you know, that's what I'm trying to wrap my head around, is if we have a $20,000 per acre conversion to xeriscaping upfront cost, would we start to realize gains after 3 to 4 years because of the you know, the minimal maintenance that it requires? And so, yeah, these are all great options. Thank you for presenting them, and I'm interested in all of them. So I certainly don't want to just, you know, task y'all with just doing homework for days, but I'm personally curious in having a little bit more refined numbers, especially in regards to what the cost is of transforming turf into xeriscaping. You know, whether that's a per acre, you know, square footage, whatever that may be. If there are opportunities for grants to either extend raw water lines or, you know, implement this remote system, I'd be curious to know. Hopefully that's enough to go with. That's all I got. Thanks.
Councilwoman Ingbretson.
So I think that's what's going to be really helpful, is that I think that what we probably need to know is which parks actually have to where you've got that touchless system, and then basically start from there, because in my mind, I think that our largest parks should all have those. and then kind of start there, but, just kind of lump them together, like, here's all the parks that's got the touchless system, here's the ones that city doesn't use for anything, kind of a thing, so that we can kind of just then have that.
Councilwoman Quest.
I was just also going to say, I think the suggestion to look into, funding opportunities outside of our own money is really good, and it also might help direct some of the strategy too, rather than necessarily starting with the solution. It may offer us other ideas, so if there are ways to kind of see what's out there, especially, when, there's a lot of different programs that are, just as you were saying, intended to reduce the amount of resources that we have to use. So I just wanted to say I really support and like that suggestion.
Carter, as far as direction goes on this thing, what I'm hearing up here is that maybe nobody wants to task you with more work, but if we could maybe look at all of these a little bit more in depth as to just give us a little bit more detail on each of them, and then with what Councilwoman Quest has said, along with Councilman Gamroth, looking into other funding or grant funding that might be available out there to help us out. Is everybody good with that? Yeah. Okay. Thank you. All right, we'll move on to council goals update and tracking demo. Mr. City Manager.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of the council. We wanted to give you a status report on council goals and how it's coming, and undoubtedly you've picked up on the fact that some of these items that come forward are goals driven, and by virtue of that, you've gotten a lot of follow-up already. However, the other thing we wanted to make sure you knew was available to you is the window by which you can check in on the progress that we're making on your own as well. This is not a system or a service that's been available before, and so tonight is a little bit of an orientation with respect to that window and how it is that you access it in order to check in on a real-time basis with respect to the progress we're making on your goals and the various steps that are included in each. And you can see when things get checked off as being done and when they're still in progress, or even when, in fact, they are behind a little bit. So with that, Mr. Mayor, if I could turn the time over to Pete to walk us through that tool that's available, I'd appreciate it.
Okay. Pete?
Good evening, Council. Here, just one second as I pull it up here. Let me first, just as a point of orientation, we are basing this on the document that Council passed about 6 months ago. This was a very long document, about 9 pages, that talked over a very wide variety of major things that the Council wanted to accomplish over the next 2 years. We take that document, and then there's a major translation challenge for staff, where we actually translate that document from a large set of goals and tasks and things that we want to get done, and actually translate them into tangible steps, things that we can actually do in order to make these things actual over the next 2 years. And so as you might recall, the original document talked very broadly about some of these things, about a broad infrastructure goal, a broad goal about business investment, a broad goal about citizen engagement. But from there, we're trying to actually make it into a situation where you can see all the things that we're trying to do. What staff has done is we've got together and we broke those large goals into 96 specific steps, 96 specific things that we have to do. As you might imagine, a lot of the challenge has been, how do we organize all this stuff? How do we keep it all together? How do we all work as a group? And how do we come up with mechanisms so that we can report back about what we're doing and how we're doing, and are we making the progress as you guys are hoping? So as such, what staff has done, we did convert it, and we created these 96 steps, and we put it in the system called Microsoft Planner. Some of you may work with, in your professional lives perhaps, with other project management software, things like Microsoft Planner or something like that. We chose Microsoft Planner largely because it was something that was universally available to all city staff. It also allowed them all to access the same system at the same time, and we thought that would be very helpful. It's a relatively simple system compared to some of the others, which might be more enterprise level, but we like the fact that it was universally accessible. We also like the fact that we didn't have to buy it. We already owned it, so that saved a little bit of money. But beyond that, it comes in natively with these, I'll call them dashboards. So very simply here, as a cover sheet, we've got 77 goals that are not, or 77 tasks that are still unfinished. We started with 96. That's because we've already completed 19 of them in the previous 6 months. What those all are, well, we broke them into these systems, and the system natively calls them buckets. Basically trying to take your larger goals, things like your infrastructure goal, your business development goal, and so on, each of which, I might add, had subparts, and some of those subparts also had subparts, and try to make them all into a coherent set so that there's something that we can understand, something that we can see. So the 19 sections that we broke them into are here. Let me talk a moment about the color coding. You will see that, for example, the very top one here listed is new police facility. You know, getting a new police facility obviously is a big and complicated process. It's a big project all unto itself. And so we broke that one into 10 specific steps, if you want to call it that. Color coding shows that where we are with each of those steps. The green ones indicate that we're done. We've already completed some steps. Blue ones indicate that we're in progress. Gray ones, we haven't even started yet. Probably because we can't, because we typically, for many of these things, we have to complete some steps before others can even be begun. And the same applies to pretty much all of these goals or I should say, I'll call them buckets because that's the way the system designs them. But basically, these are different sets of tasks that need to get accomplished. Now, some more detail about what exactly is going on with all these things. Well, let me switch over. Sorry, 1 second. The way the system works, every one of these tasks starts to look like a little box on a screen. And so here they are the exact same goals, but presented slightly differently. Here we have the new police facility, and these are all the steps that we were just talking about. You know, things like, you know, issue an RFP for the architecture, contract with a firm for facility design, so on and so forth. And you'll see that these are, there are quite a few of them. And so navigating around it can be a little challenging. So I'm gonna take a slightly different view, if that's all right. This is the way they all look when they're all together. It's kind of resembles the periodic table of the elements. It's really hard to see it all at once and make sense of it. So you really do need to be able to zoom in and sort of examine each one individually in order to really make sense. So within each one of these, you can actually start to dig in and start saying, all right, look, what exactly is going on with this individual step? And so you can see with this particular view, this step here is, so right now I'm clicking on the facility assessment. One of our goals is to look at all the city's facilities, all the city's buildings, and try to get a sense for which ones need to be rebuilt or need some maintenance. And so among other things, council has, you know, recently been working with getting a contract going in order to do a citywide assessment. And there is a contract that's in progress right now, trying to get past the council. It might be coming next week or very soon after. But again, getting that citywide facility assessment requires different steps. And so in this particular case, well, we can see that this is one where, you know, we're trying to get some input from city staff and city boards. We can see it was assigned to Zulima Lopez, and we can see more specifically what she has done on it recently. In this particular case, you know, she's done some work on November 8th, for example. If she does some work on it tomorrow and she updates it, this will become available and become present, and it'll be some sort of information that becomes available and that is shared among city staff, but it also is available to you as city council members. So the system that we have designed, or I say we, but really it's Michael Sefcik, who's our IT manager. He came up with a way to present this in a way and share it in a way that council members can themselves see, that you can see from within your network computers. Again, it's this, you build it from here, and you can start from this screen, and I've written some instructions that will tell you exactly how to go about accessing it from your home computers, and I'll email this to you guys in just a few minutes. But basically, you go in, and I suggest if you're curious about something and say, all right, well, look, I want to know more about the city facility assessment. You can see that there's a couple of steps that are behind. They're red. They're late. Not very late, I can point out. They were due on October 31st in this particular case, or some of them were. But perhaps I want to see that in more detail. Well, I can do that by switching over to this other screen. And then there are a couple of series of clicks as I'm going to go through. And I'm going to show you guys right now, but I'm also going to provide you with the instructions for how to do it. But just as a general sense for how this is supposed to work, so I'm going to filter it here. So these are the buckets. I'm going to grab the facility assessment. I'm also going to present it by how much progress we've made. And so here I am, I'm looking at just this facility assessment. You can see I've got some tasks here which are not started. They're facility assessment tasks. I got some tasks which are in progress. I've got some tasks which are already finished. And so with any one of these, if I wanted to, I could drill in, I could see what's going on with it. And likewise, you guys from home can go home and drill in and see what's going on with it. And in that way, as we move forward for the next weeks and months, and in this particular case, years, because these goals do extend out 2 years. There's a lot of work to do here. But it's a way for you guys to keep an eye on it, see what's going on. Perhaps I can take a breather at this moment and ask if there are other questions. There are a couple more things I wanted to say, but this is the overview of the system.
Councilman Neal.
So will you be sending us a link then to this so that we can access it from home, or?
Precisely.
Because it's not going to be available to the public, I'm assuming.
Yes, that is correct, Councilman Bill.
Thanks.
With that being said, I guess there was a couple other things I did want to at least throw out there. First of all, I do want to draw attention to the fact that we added a transit goal. This was not in the original documents that were sent to council back in May, but frankly, in that time, in the last year, we adopted what had been the CATSI operation. We brought it in as a link. That's a major endeavor. And it was such a major endeavor, it felt appropriate to add it to this larger system, and again, try to track it in a similar way. And so with council's blessing, we'll keep it in there and keep tracking it along with the other goals that council has already adopted for us. Secondly, and this was something that was pointed out to me earlier today, the system is set up so that it takes this long textual document and tries to break it into 96 specific steps. Each of the 96 specific steps are part of 19 specific buckets or tasks. It's a big, complicated system with lots of things going on in it. But even then, it's important to remember that the goals document you guys adopted is something more like the forest, and these individual tasks are more like the trees. But sometimes, even when we do all these little tasks, we still haven't necessarily accomplished the entire goal. There may yet be more things that we need to accomplish or need to do as a way to truly achieve what you guys were looking for as far as an end result, as a comprehensive, complete solution to all the things you guys were looking for. So, although I fully expect that, over the next year, we're going to see these things move along. You're going to see these tasks left drop from 77 down to 57 and then down to 0. We're going to see lovely green bars here as we accomplish all these things. But as we get close, we might have to reassess to make sure that, okay, now that we've done all this work, have we really achieved all the things that you guys wanted us to achieve? And is there additional work that we need to do, perhaps to pull it all together?
Any questions from anybody? Councilman Gamros.
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you, Pete, for the presentation. I like this tool. I like that we're kind of monitoring in real time our goals. I don't think there's any purpose in setting goals and not revisiting them for 2 years and then realizing, oh, we didn't achieve a ton of that. So I appreciate the real-time monitoring. Would love to see us check in on these goals, periodically throughout the next 2 years. And so I just appreciate the work you've done. I imagine it's hard to get this all set up and organized and stuff like that. So I appreciate the work and like that we're continually revisiting this, not just setting the goals and forgetting about them till the next council seats themselves. So I appreciate it. Thanks.
Councilmember Pollock.
Thank you. And yeah, thanks, Pete. To echo that, I think this is a really important tool and an important step to just keep organized, keep accountability. And for me, I think it'll be really helpful because we get emails from time to time asking about this or that or what the status is or that sort of thing. And that inevitably means that I have to email Carter and he has to bug you. And so it just seems like, oh, if I have a tool where I can just kind of go in, get a quick update and be able to let people know that in fact, yes, like things are still moving ahead. I think that'll be really helpful from my standpoint.
Okay. Thank you, Pete. Mr. Manager, that has direction requested on it. Are you needing direction on this?
Mr. Mayor, I don't think so, unless you see something that you need help with or you'd like to see added attention to. We'd be pleased to take that direction.
Okay, I think just that link getting sent to us.
Yep.
Yeah. Okay. Oh, yeah, do you need to approve addition of the transit goal in there then?
Oh, sure. Yes, thank you.
Everybody good with that?
That'd be great.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Okay, we'll move on to agenda review. Also moving November 23rd work session to November 30th and canceling the December 28th work session. Mr. City Manager.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor and members of the council. Certainly, if that is of interest to you, we would take that direction and prepare your grid document accordingly. As it relates to upcoming meetings here and things to be aware of, on the 16th, which, is our next business meeting, we do have a couple pre-meeting items we wanted you to be aware of by way of, follow-up with you. We do have some speed study results for 12th and 13th Streets that we're bringing forward for conversation with you and direction you may want to give. We also want to catch you up a little bit on Casper 311 and some of the technical difficulties that we've run into, not the least of which is the resending of some 1,600 emails as a follow-up more than once and certainly more than necessary. I certainly hope to have a fix identified for that not happening again. The other thing that I wanted to bring to your attention with respect to the meeting of the 16th is indeed a couple things that you're going to see and be familiar with, except with this one. We've talked to you before about the Lwcf Grant. We've recently been informed that indeed that has been successful. We were able to get that money. We will need to run an agreement by you as a formal acceptance mechanism of those funds. And if it would please the council, we can certainly remind you what it is that those dollars are expected to cover. And you can find that in your memo that will be attached to that request. Another follow-up item that you'll be pleased to see, hopefully, is with regard to the Proud to Host the Best agreement that we have with the Proud to Host the Best committee. As you'll recall, that is a $50,000 a year contribution for that effort to retain the high school athletics activities here in our community. We also have, let's see, there's one more thing I want to bring your attention. The facility condition assessment. I thought might be helpful to bring to your attention that indeed as a council goals follow-up item, that too is coming forward for your formal adoption. Very consistent with what we talked about in work session not too long ago. And I think that's all I'd bring to your attention for the 16th. We do have a work session item coming up for the 30th. If you approve that postponement from the 23rd, we've got a couple items to talk about there. The subsidy request from the county. We'd like to go over some open container debrief with you. And I will promise you we probably have another item or two that we need to add to that agenda as well that we haven't quite docketed. As a part of this, I always like to remind you that you do have kind of a future items docket sort of outlook, if you will, to keep your eye on in the event you're wondering about certain things that may not have showed up on a meeting yet. We do have some of these items on our horizon and looking for the opportunity to sneak them into a meeting and make sure we get that follow-up and information to you in a relatively timely fashion. And with that, Mr. Mayor, I'd open up to any questions.
Councilman Nell.
One question. Why, when Brooke came and saw us, why did I think, or why am I left feeling that the $50,000 subsidy for the Proud to Host events was a one-time thing? I don't recall us discussing that being a perpetual or annual amount. Or is everybody else under that impression, or?
Mr. Mayor, I appreciate that question, because if indeed it was only meant to be a once type allocation, then we probably ought to talk. My understanding was that it was a 4-year proposal and that they were going forward to the Athletic Association with a 4-year relationship with the city council.
I'm not opposed. The money it generates for our community, I'm not opposed at all. I just, I know it was coming up for bid again, so I thought that was just an attractor for us to grab that bid, is the way I remember it being presented, or thought it was.
No, it was a 4-year bid at $50,000 each, and they were able to secure it here because of the fact that it was guaranteed. So
well, thanks for the clarity, but I certainly don't have any objections to it anyway. Yeah.
Okay, so I guess we need to decide whether or not, so the manager and I had talked about November 23rd, just that work session. Normally, we just don't have that work session, but it is a 5-week month. So, not that I want you guys to work all the time, but I thought, well, if we took the 23rd off for Thanksgiving, we still had the 30th. So, the proposal was to move it if everybody's okay with that. And that way, we still get the meeting in. And then in December, the 28th, that work session, that's right over Christmas. And so we would cancel that work session if you guys are okay with that.
So we would just have 3 in December?
3 in December, but you will have, is that correct, 5? Oh, no, we have 4 in a row then, yeah.
Right.
So, right, yep, only 3 in December.
Woohoo.
Everybody okay with that? All right.
Thank you.
Okay, legislative review, Mr. City Manager.
Mr. Mayor, I have nothing to add tonight on that topic.
Okay, we'll go council around the table. Councilwoman Ingebretson. Councilman Johnson. Councilman Gamroth.
Thank you, Mayor. Just a couple things. There was an Oil City News article yesterday in regards to our, I believe it was a consent resolution to award a contract to a Pennsylvania firm for water tank painting, something to the tune of $370,000 or so. I saw a lot of public commentary on that one, and I knew there would be. I almost pulled it from discussion that night just to have an opportunity to talk about it, but I saw a lot of folks upset that a local firm had not been awarded that contract. Just wanted to remind people of the 9 bids. None of them were local, and so my guess is that is because it's a pretty specialized service and there's just not enough demand in our area to warrant folks investing time, equipment, and training and stuff to do that. I could be wrong though, so if there's contractors out there that were not aware of that project and would have otherwise bid, I'd be certainly curious to hear whether it was something that wasn't on their radar or if there's opportunity for the city to do a better job providing outreach. But my understanding is that those are, that the public notices in the paper, that we're publishing those in the paper. I believe it's on the city website. And I believe there's a variety of government bidding portals where you can see those projects out for bid. If a firm in Pennsylvania saw the opportunity, I would hope that the local folks had access to it as well. But if there's anyone out there that disagrees, I would certainly welcome feedback from those folks about how we could keep more work local. But same with, freight elevator at the event center. There's just sometimes not people local that can do those sorts of things. So certainly open to input, but wanted to just make that clear for a lot of folks. The reason it didn't go to a local contractor is because none of them bid for it. So I also wanted to just make a quick comment in regards to the recent specific purpose tax. It obviously, did not pass. But folks may have seen that Laramie County passed specific purpose taxes. They had 14 proposals, 13 of which passed to the tune of $128 million, which is nearly our entire annual budget. So what they did do differently down in Laramie County was each of those proposals was a separate initiative on the ballot, whereas in Natrona County, the water line and the Midwest Avenue reconstruction were combined. And so I certainly, legitimate reasoning to do that, but if specific purpose taxes are explored again in Natrona County in the future, I think it would be wise of us to consider having separate proposals for each project. It gives citizens a little bit more control over the ones they support, over the ones they don't. I'm a bit disappointed to see that we couldn't even raise 4.3 in Laramie County, raised 128 million for a variety of things. I mean, equipment for emergency services, parks for children, the event complex, roads, 25 million for roads. I would love to get $25 million to fix our roads up. So, they were very successful in that, and I imagine they're going to see the reward of that over the next few years. So I would just like to, ask that we explore something like that. Should we, the county explore specific purpose tax in the future? That's all I have. Thanks.
Councilman Nell.
I'm with you, Kyle. I think that's just a great point. That should have been separated out, and I think it would have, at least the water line would have got approved. So from the feedback I've gotten, but coming up soon, we're going to be debating Delta Airlines, and I think the public needs to get weighed in on this. We have service that goes to Denver now through United, and the county is going to ask the city to subsidize keeping that flight open to Salt Lake City. Now, as in politics, sometimes we take sides. And me personally, I don't care if they stay or if they go. The tickets are so damn expensive, you can't afford to fly out of here half the time on those flights. And now we're going to subsidize them and still pay heavy flight. I'm just sick of it. So, but then again, if we don't subsidize it, you can bet the United rates are going to go up because there's nothing stopping them from getting the sky either. But I know my family flew to Pittsburgh 3 weeks ago, and we drove to Denver and saved $1,400 for 4 of us. Money's money, especially in this day and age. So I don't know if we do subsidize, I hope that we could somehow come up with some form of an agreement with them to limit the amount of money they're charging our constituents. We've got to be able to have some say in that. Anyway, that's my thought for the night. Thank you.
Councilman Cathy.
I guess I am sorry that the 1 cent didn't pass, but my biggest disappointment is the number of voters. We had approximately 7,000 people vote here. There were over 13,000 voted in Laramie. The last time we had a special election, there were only 6,000 and some that voted. There were almost 7,000 that voted in the last election in Ward 3 alone. People, get out and vote. This is your time, and basically you are allowing the special interest people to run this city from special election standpoints. And the silent majority had better get off their duff and get out and start voting. That's the only thing I can say. I am extremely disappointed in our voters.
Councilwoman Quest.
Thank you. Just a couple things from me. Councilman Nell, I look forward to the debate on Delta. Should be fun. I've been going on a little bit of an orientation around town the past week and this week, and I just wanted to say thank you for everybody who's taken time to help me get to know the city that I grew up in even better than I already did. And especially Pete, it's been a bit of a roller coaster for you trying to organize all of that. So I just wanted to say thank you. I really appreciate it. We also got an update yesterday that COVID's still very much present in our community. There's one ICU bed as of yesterday available, and I think just a friendly reminder to take it seriously and to talk to your doctors about getting vaccinated if that's appropriate for you, and also just to say thank you to our healthcare workers who are continuing to do their best to keep all of us healthy and safe, especially our kiddos who thankfully, those who are 5 and over, have access to the vaccine now, but we can't get everybody covered. So just encourage you all to continue to take it seriously and protect our community. That's everything. Thanks.
Councilmember Pollock.
I don't have anything tonight. Thank you.
Vice Mayor Pacheco.
Thank you. Just a couple things. One, I had a constituent get a hold of me and pass along a program called Academy Hour, and I had never heard of it. Anyway, I said I would pass this along, and this is probably for you, Deputy Chief. But Academy Hour, I guess they offer supportive mental health education for law enforcement officers and first responders. It's a designed program for that, so maybe pass Academy Hour along to Rich. If he has any questions, I just said that I would do that, and it sounds like they have a pretty good program for peer support leaders, teammates. They do a lot of really good stuff. I kind of spent the afternoon looking at that, and so Academy Hour looks really good. So passing that along to you, Deputy. The other issue that I wanted to bring up real quickly, I chatted a little bit about this in leadership in our meeting. So, and I did make some clarification about an ordinance. I've been called a couple times by some parents at St. Anthony's Tri-Parish School that are concerned about the bar that's the backward lounge that's opening up within proximity. We had a gentleman, of course, speak to us last week about his concerns about his house there. Anyway, a couple of them were very, very concerned about it. One of them has asked me to bring forward if there is interest in creating an ordinance of trying to create a buffer between a between a bar and a proximity to the schools. I didn't know our legality behind that. Wanted to put that out there, see if that's something we would want to look at. But maybe I need clarification first from our attorney and maybe from Carter, kind of moving forward with that. So.
Okay. The only thing I guess I would add from our conversation here tonight is that while I agree that I don't want to see us put money into a private business as far as airlines go, once you lose it, you don't get it back generally. And you're right, once it's gone, the others are going to charge more. So I guess it's the lesser of two evils, but I'd rather have that discussion to see what we can do to remedy the problem. Okay, we have an executive session tonight, but we're going to take a real quick break before we go into that. So we'll be adjourned for now.